I, I didn't respond to any specific school or any specific coach when I responded. Um, I think it is too fluid to put specific numbers because it's changing daily. I also think this is going to look very different 3 years from now. I do believe that. I think college athletics could look very different. I think college football will look very different. And I actually think this NIL space will look different. It's like anything else, right? You're going to come out, it's going to be a mad rush. And then the pendulum will eventually, level back out. So I have not got into specific numbers. I love it when other people do because it allows me to use that to illustrate and for people to compare and contrast best practice or whatever it may be. And those things are helpful, especially when maybe one number came out about one school, but it was speculating. Um, and then you have another school that the coach specifically uses numbers. Those things are helpful. So I haven't talked specific numbers, but I've been able to use those in comparing, talking about commitment level and expectations.
Hey, James, I was told that July 17th there's a meeting scheduled between Pat, Sean Clifford, and Jason Stahl, the CFP EPA, and Coach Beasley. Do you have any comment on that?
First of all, that's not accurate at all. But yeah, we've already kind of addressed that. I addressed that on the podium. I know Sean's addressed it as well. The thing I will say that I'm very proud of is we've had unbelievable conversations with our players. And in a very short time, I think Pat's done a really good job of coming in and developing relationships with our players as well. I will say this. You better be comfortable having conversations that in my 26 years of doing this and in my 12 years as doing this as a head coach, when you talk about NIL, you talk about the transfer portal, there's just so many changes in college football. There's conversations that you have to have that you would think would have been unheard of 15 years ago. And to me, it's about embracing the changes that are going on in college athletics and college football. But at the end of the day, I'm super proud of our players and our administration being open to having really good conversations that people recognize are in the best interest of student athletes and really college athletics long term. Yeah, I've already addressed his question. I've already made the statement on the stage. I've already kind of talked right now. I'm really proud of the conversations and the relationships that we have at Penn State with our players, that they feel comfortable talking to us about all different matters and subjects. Yeah. So that's been fantastic, and we have to continue to do that. I think everything is on the table. If you look at what happened with some of the lawsuits in the Supreme Courts, the way they ruled, it's telling. So to me, I think everything is on the table. And that's where these conversations are really important on a conference level. These conversations are really important at a university level. And like always, it's going to start with the relationships in your locker room. And those conversations need to go in both directions. We can learn from them. They can learn from us. But I think ultimately at Penn State, I want what's in the best interest of our student athletes. I want what's in the best interest of college athletics. I want what's in the best interest of college football. That's where it becomes challenging, is how do you navigate all those things at the same time? Yeah, so I think people that have been kind of followed our facility, we've made some great progress. I'm really excited about what we'll be moving into from a training table, from a nutrition area, and from a weight room perspective this summer. We're a little bit behind schedule, but it will work out well. Um, I actually had an opportunity to walk through it the other day and was very impressed. Um, we still have not touched our second floor, which is where the coaches are. Except we did get carpet. We've gotten new carpet in the last 30 years, so that was a step in that area. But that was very important to me when we came to Penn State, that we take care of the players' areas first. So I think the plan is right now that at the end of the season, we would finish that last stage of our last football building, um, and then kind of go from there. I think some of the other things after that are more big picture with the athletic department. But the good thing is, like you've mentioned, uh, me and Pat have really been aligned, throughout the entire process of things that he feels strongly about, I agree with, and vice versa. So that's been very helpful. And nobody comes to this and says, "Hey, I'm concerned about how the summer went," right? Yeah. So kind of like the things I said at the podium, our testing numbers in terms of the things that we've been doing for 100 years in football, bigger, stronger, faster. Obviously, having some of the technology like Catapult, which actually gives you specific data about how they're running outside on the field, that's valuable as well. And then I think the depth that I talked about at the podium as well. As we all know, um, we had depth issues last year where when we were healthy, we could play with anybody in the country, and we showed that. But when we had some injuries at some key positions, we weren't able to sustain it the way we need to sustain it. And a game that is physical, like the game of football, that's going to happen. And you have to prepare for it and you have to be ready for it. And I just think we have more depth at more positions than we've ever had. And I also think, excuse me, not that we've ever had, that we've had in the last few years. But I think the other thing, like I mentioned, is based on testing numbers and feedback from the players and things like that. Although our recruiting class was ranked highly, that sounds great. But once they show up to campus, no one cares whether you're a 5-star or 2-star. And we all know there's exceptions to that every year. There's the 5-star who doesn't pan out. There's the 2-star that ends up going to the College Football Hall of Fame. So once they show up, you get a better feel. And right now, it just seems like we have more players that have a chance to help us after just arriving on campus. And that's a combination of high school prospects, transfers, and a junior college player. But there's probably more players that we feel like can impact us this year than maybe we've had in years past. No, I actually, to be honest with you, try to stay a couple steps ahead, and we missed an opportunity. We should have hit him up before coming to town. Um, really just to say hi and show respect. We're gonna follow up after we leave. Every one of our guys handled the shrimp cocktail, except for Tig. Tig was a little bit late. He had an exam he had to take last night. Jair Brown. Everybody's sitting there watching. No one gives him a heads up. Shrimp with the cocktail sauce, mouth shut, vapors through the nose. Didn't end well for Tig, to be honest with you. Um, but no, it's a good relationship, and we want to make sure that we continue to build those relationships, because obviously that's a well respected institution in this city.
James, could you
Yeah, that it's a fair question. It's hard for me to say right now. obviously that's one of the question marks, which is why you're asking. I do think there is a group of guys. I think there's three legitimate candidates and maybe more based on once we get into camp. But obviously, the guys, Keaton Ellis and Zach Key and Jalen Reed. And there's some guys coming in again in this recruiting class, KJ Winston, so on and so forth. I think it's going to be a competition. I also think it's going to allow us to have somebody behind Tig that you feel comfortable pulling him out of the game and making sure he's fresh in the fourth quarter or late in the season. So that's an example of kind of what we're talking about in terms of our depth. That's a perfect example of, although we have a question, there's enough exciting candidates to fill that role. Yeah, again, it's hard to tell, because at that position, you can look awesome running around in your t-shirt and underwear, and it doesn't matter. Because there's some guys that have been high-level offensive linemen in the NFL that don't look great running around in their underwear. So I do think, again, from a depth standpoint there's six guys and maybe more. But when you talk about Tangwell, Scruggs, Wormley, who was going to be our starter last year going into the season before an injury, Norzad, who's been super impressive since getting on campus, Dawkins and JB Nelson, that's a good group of guys to be able to work with. And that doesn't even count, whether it's Traore or Achumba, and even Effner's a guy that people aren't talking about that I think he's a guy that could be a 5-position player. We have a number of offensive linemen that create flexibility to allow us to get the best guy on the field. We're not a program that's got like true obvious tackles and true obvious guards. We have a few of those guys, but a lot of them are players that could play multiple positions. So, that's really where you want to be.
James, could you give a little context how you would describe the amount of time and or mental energy that you spend on thinking about NIL or roster management with the transfer portal? Obviously, you're a football coach. You coach football and you coach your players and take care of them. But how much does that take up?
I think that's one of the things that's funny. Me and Pat Kraft, our athletic director, and Vinny James, who's our sports supervisor that we work directly with Pat. I think that's been one of kind of their conversations is about them taking a lot of those things off my plate. I'm not saying specifically NIL, but a lot of the things that I've had to spend time on maybe in the past, or being the person pounding the drum about a message or the importance of something, them taking a lot of those things off my plate, which has been great. Chris Peterson has already showed me a couple things on Twitter of things that Pat has said that maybe in years past I was saying. That's valuable. So like you're saying, I can spend as much time as I possibly can on football, scheme, development, recruiting. That's been something that we've discussed about. But I think your point is a good one. There are more things on a college football coach's plate than ever before. NIL is something that obviously we can only be so much involved with based on the current rules from an NCAA perspective and depending on your state, how it's set up. But you better be aware of it either way, however it's set up. And the transfer portal and everything else. You better be aware, you better be attentive, you better be doing everything you possibly can to develop your entire roster and be able to show your entire roster that they're going to have an opportunity and a role either this year or moving forward. It's funny, been a lot of conversations about scheduling, and you talk about scheduling not only to put your team in the best position to win the Big Ten or to win a national championship, but also a schedule that's going to allow you to get players experience before you get into conference play. And that has to factor in as well. So it impacts everything. But I think your question is a good one. And if you're not careful, you're going to be spending time on a lot of other things rather than the things that specifically show up on Saturdays.
And kind of what I'm leading to is, you have an athletic director, as you mentioned, and everybody has a recruiting coordinator, and you have staff around you. But as college football is changing at the pro level, there's a coach and there's a GM, right, at every position. We see college football evolve to a point, I don't know that exactly it's a general manager, but that there's someone even more specific in the football program who kind of deals with all that stuff. So the coach deals with X's and O's and the health and welfare of my players, and everything else is somebody else.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, if you look maybe 5 years ago and before, like one of the major concerns probably with athletic directors and presidents and things like that was staff size. That was a big discussion in college football. But then the rules changed in a way that you have no choice but to increase your staff size, because if you're, like, you look at the summer, if you are spending the time that you should be with your current roster and players, helping them academically, athletically, socially, but then at the same time, you're also having to have high school camps and 7-on-7s for the future of your program. And then now we have official visits in the summer, and these are all happening pretty much the same weekends. You have no choice but to develop these other groups or entities within your program, whether it's recruiting, whether it's roster management. The way the model is evolving, you almost have no choice but to do it that way.
James, what didn't work out with Kirk Ciarrocca?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a fair question. And I would like to say this, that I am a huge fan of Kirk's. Obviously, the timing for college football in general, specifically for the Big Ten, was challenging with our season being canceled, with COVID. It was a very unique time for all of us. So some of the things that Kirk had to deal with were outside of his control. When you're hiring a new offensive coordinator, defense coordinator, special teams coordinator, and you really don't have we had no spring ball. Right now we have some variation in the rules changes of like OTAs, where we're able to meet with and be with our players more than ever. He got none of that. So I think that's the best way I could describe some of the challenges and issues that had nothing to do with Kirk. And I'm a big fan. I was really glad we were in Detroit sometime this year. It all kind of, and I got a chance to see Kirk, and he walked up and we had a really good conversation. I just got a ton of respect for him as a professional. I got a ton of respect for him as a man, and I wish him nothing but the best and success. I can understand why PJ brought him back. He obviously did a great job for them. I'm going to be rooting for him and his family every game but one. But I got nothing but great things to say about Kirk, and a lot of the things that played out were outside of his control.
What's the process for the Whiteout game, picking that game, and how did it become that started?
Yeah. So for us, our Whiteout game has typically been a night game, with the fireworks and the white T-shirts and clothing on the backdrop of the black sky, and it's pretty special. Although the 12 o'clock games, if you look at the ratings in the Big Ten, have done unbelievably well, and I think it's been an ingenious approach in terms of starting out college football Saturdays with a primetime game. We did a very simple kind of poll with our fans on social media We didn't talk about specific games or teams, but we just said for the whiteout, what's important to you? Night game, afternoon, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Is it the opponent that matters most? So we kind of did this. We mixed it in there with like, what's your favorite thing, the hamburger or the hot dog at the stadium? We kind of started out with those things to try to act like we cared whether it was a hot dog or not. It was really, we're just setting it up to get to the whiteout question. But the data said that most people want a night game. So when we looked at our schedule, the game that we thought had the best chance to be a night game, another game we had seen was probably going to be a 12 o'clock game. That impacted the decision, and that's where I was leaning. The fans backed that up. And then when Pat came in, I asked him, and right away he thought the same thing. So that's why the choice was made. And then the other thing is there's some things from a scheduling perspective in the Big Ten where the way it currently sits is we can't have night games after a certain point on the schedule. So that limits it as well. And then also, if you want all the fans to dress up in white, that becomes more difficult later in the season when people want to wear their hunting gear to stay warm, if that makes sense. So a lot of factors that went into it. I think it's also maybe caught people a little bit off guard because the way the schedule fell up to that point, it had pretty much rotated between two opponents. So it kind of set up an expectation, but that's really just kind of how it played out, if that's fair. Or we have discussions about, and we're aligned already without him having to convince me and me having to convince him, if that makes sense. So I think there's a lot of from an efficiency standpoint, there's a lot of time that's saved that way. So I think that's been really valuable. And I think the other thing is having somebody as a fighter. And everybody needs that across every campus and in every aspect. And again, I want this to come off specifically to Pat because total respect for the regime that we had previously, but Pat's fighting some battles that maybe hadn't been fought in the past, just like the provost is fighting battles that's in the best interest of the university, from an academic perspective, and just like the dean of the education school's got to fight their battles, and I think that's been apparent so far. I don't know if you were standing here when I said it. Chris Peterson's showing me, some of the tweets that have gone out already that Pat's saying that in years past I had to say, and I'm like, good. Well, he made a comment I think about NIL. And he made another comment, about how Penn State, interesting, has opened 9 straight years on the road in the Big Ten. Last year at Wisconsin, this year at Purdue, and that's happened for 9 years. Like, I don't know how that's statistically even possible, especially when it's been brought up before. But Pat's pounding that drum. So like in years past, I would feel like I'd have to maybe say some of these things to maybe create some pressure or to create some dialogue that needed to happen. I don't have to. You can come talk to me about the left guard right now. I'm jacked about talking about the left guard and having somebody else pound the drum on the importance of NIL.
How much does that take the pressure off you, not even in a situation like this, but to not be having to think about it as much, sort of the big picture athletic?
Well, I think it obviously allows our focus as a football program to be on the things that you would say are most important. But the challenge is if you're also not fighting for those things, it's hard to sustain your program or build your program, because if you're just laser focused on this, but your program is not growing in these other areas, then it's going to be hard to do that. So that is extremely, extremely valuable. And the other thing is, I just think when you're coming out saying these things all the time, and you're the one pounding the drum, it also puts you in position to be taking shots that you don't need to be taking. And it also can come off possibly like an excuse. So having somebody else be able to drive those messages is been very valuable, and I'm very appreciative.
Is there also some value in the fact that he's a little bit of an outsider? Basically, he's been an AD in a couple other places that he doesn't necessarily have. Is it almost good in some ways that he doesn't have Penn State experience and he's sort of bringing a lot of those guys from outside?
Well, I think, again, the people that have covered Penn State closely for a long time know that I've always said one of the greatest strengths at Penn State is people come, they fall in love with it, and they never leave. One of our weaknesses is people come to Penn State, they fall in love with it, and never leave. So a lot of times, like a lot of the people here that maybe represent other universities or cover other universities, I say, we're all proud, right? We're all so proud of our institutions and our history and our traditions, but if you're not studying best practice and what's really going on, it's easy to just say, well, we're the best at this, and that's really not the truth. So I think your point is a good one. That outside lens of seeing other things and seeing other places is valuable. But again, you got to do it in a respectful way, because you got to still embrace and respect the tradition and the history that's there, but not hold on to that so tightly that you don't continue to grow and evolve as an organization as well.
Do you think, I was talking to Jair, and he said, he was talking about the incoming class, you mentioned it on the podium. He said they're so prepared now, physically ready to maybe play right away. Do you feel like this is the most prepared group, whether it's the transfer portal or where it's just the true freshmen or the January enrollees? Is this the most prepared group physically and mentally ready to maybe compete right away that you've had at Penn State, and why do you think that is?
It feels that way, but again, until I get out at practice and you guys come to our weekly press conference, it's hard to say that right now. But yes, it feels that way. You look at the strength numbers, you look at the speed numbers, you look at the size. You know, you look at a Nick Singleton, he doesn't look like a freshman. He's 220 pounds, ran really fast, you know, power cleaned a lot. You look at Denye's 255 pounds right now, benched, I think, 405. You know, so there just seems to be more of those guys. But again, in the weight room and running around shorts and T-shirts, I said underwear, I really meant shorts, just to be clear to everybody. That's very different than when the pads come on. So I'll have a better idea, but just in terms of testing numbers and size and those things. And then again, it's different because now with the new rule changes and us allowed to be able to spend more football time with them in the summer and the off season, that's helped as well. But it's funny because we were talking about this at dinner last night. You know, Tig's high school experience is very different than PJ's. So PJ doesn't feel that way as much as Tig because of just their backgrounds and where they came from.
Coach, thanks for doing this. I've interviewed all three of your guys. Great guys. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
You guys are always a pleasure to work with such guys like this.
Thank you, sir.
This summer, you know, these three guys are obviously too, but I'm sure there's other guys that have stood out this summer. There's just some guys that, you know, you want to acknowledge that are really there, and if you're excited for these guys.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I typically don't like to answer that because what's going to happen is there's a bunch, and I'm going to forget someone, and their feelings are going to be hurt, or their parents are going to be upset. And right now, what I've talked about all day is we have more depth and more competition than we've had the last couple of years. So there's a lot of those guys right now. I think you look at, for example, last year we sustained some injuries. And last year, the injuries that we sustained happened to be at positions that we did not have the proven experience depth that we do this year. So you lose PJ Mustafer, and his backup had not played a lot of football in the Big Ten. It's a significant drop-off, and we weren't able to overcome that. when you lose your starting quarterback in the same game and the backup quarterback had not had significant reps. So I just think we have more of that right now. There's still a few question marks like everybody in the country has. And we got to resolve them as quickly as we possibly can. But we seem to have either less questions this year than we did last year, or where we do have questions, we have more legitimate possibilities as answers behind them. Yeah, PJ, the people that cover our program closely, he's a special guy. I would hire him. Like, when he gets done playing, I'd hire him to do a lot of different things, depending on what he wants to do. He's just that type of guy. He's raised right. His parents are phenomenal. He comes from a football family. His dad played at West Virginia. His brother plays for the Chicago Bears. Came from a great high school program at McDonough High School in Baltimore. We have a number of players from that school. And when you get a kid, that ball is really important to him. They're high production, low maintenance. He's already graduated. Not only was raised the right way from a home training perspective, was also raised the right way in football and came from a really good high school program. The more guys you have like that, the better. The other thing I like about him is a lot of leaders in today's game as players, they want to lead by example. And they're not really into calling their teammates out. PJ is willing and is respected enough that he can do that with anybody. And because of the success he's had and the way he's gone about his business and the way he works, he can do that with anybody in the program and is willing to do it and isn't worried about hurting feelings. Yes, sir.
Speaking of PJ,
Yes, Mr. Brown.
how proud are you that PJ passed the conditioning test?
I'll tell you what. There's some of the more impressive things that are coming together right now. The size of the steak, the size of the 2 lobster tails, the pound of potatoes, the way he made me feel uncomfortable trying to finish my own steak because I thought he was going to take that, and the fact that he passed the conditioning test coming off a significant injury where a lot of guys that I've seen, when they have a significant injury, they may use that as a reason to have a modified conditioning test. And here's a guy that said, okay, I know there's some things that I need to accomplish both physically and mentally to check all the boxes to be prepared against Purdue. And one of them is pass the conditioning test that I passed as a freshman at 285 pounds, that now I'm passing as a 5th-year senior at 320 pounds before the steak and the lobster. And he does it and takes great pride in it and has fun with it. So it was interesting. We were talking last night at dinner, and he kept saying it to the waiter. He said it to Pat. He said it to me, and that was going to be his deal with everybody he talked to. That was going to be his answer for everything. And I passed the conditioning test. But to me, that it's an example of one of the lessons that we think is really important in our program is you're going to work hard in this program and you're going to work hard the rest of your life. You might as well have fun and a great attitude while you're doing it. And he's a great example of that. The conditioning test for you is very different than a conditioning test for that man based on body types and how his career has gone. So it's a good question and we're having fun with it, but I also want to get the point across how proud I am of him, how proud I am of you, and Sean, and our locker room, and our team. Yes, Mr. Brown. Yeah, I will say this. I'm somewhat of a traditionalist when it comes to college football and the regionality that it used to be. I still feel myself wanting that. But again, I also understand that, like I've said, college football has changed dramatically. And you better be changing with it as a conference, as a school, as an AD, as a head football coach. You better be embracing the change because it's changing whether you want it to or not. And obviously, some other conferences made some decisions, and it put us in a position where we needed to as well. So, obviously, when you're able to get two universities that are respected not only athletically but also align with the Big Ten from an academic perspective, that's, I think, really valuable because at the end of the day, Penn State is a university, and I think the Big Ten as a conference isn't a conference that is a winning at all cost conference. We still want to make sure that our student athletes have a well-rounded experience, and we want to make sure that our universities are well-rounded. So being really strategic about who we bring in, I think, is important. So I am embracing it for all those reasons, and I think there's going to be a lot of attention and a lot of excitement about some games that maybe our fans and our alumni and our lettermen aren't able to see or haven't been able to see as often as a Penn State versus USC or a Penn State versus UCLA. I hope as many of those games are at home as possible, but I think it's a good thing for our conference, and it makes sense in the current landscape of college football. I'm sorry?
What was different about facing Michigan last year?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We've had great games year in and year out against Michigan. A lot of them have been one possession games. Obviously, going there is a tough place to play, and coming our place is a tough place to play. But obviously, they were able to do it consistently, and I think that's the challenge in our conference, right? Especially on our side of the conference in our division. You got to be able to do it week in and week out, and at a consistent level. I think if you had to say what was the biggest differentiator, the defensive ends. When you have guys like that change the game plan significantly. When you have two guys that can rush the passer and be disruptive like they were able to be all season long, that was one of many, but probably the thing that stood out to me the most. Yeah. Yeah, I would say, well, if we had to choose to do it all over again, we'd probably do it differently, right? But that's part of growing up. This is a learning opportunity for him. This is a learning opportunity for our players. But again, these conversations and these discussions are critical. They're critical on every college campus, and some of these experiences and growing pains are necessary. But at the end of the day, I'm super proud of him. I'm super proud of our guys. I love Sean. His heart is always in the right place and well-intended for his teammates, for his future players at Penn State, for the conference as a whole. I think he's handled it well. I mean, I'll have a better idea. You guys will write stories after this, and Chris will tell me how it went over. But from what I've been told from Chris Peterson and Greg Kincaid, who work with us with the media, very well, and I'm proud of him. And he'll be better for this, and so will our team. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't think it's changed. it's always been the thing that we've tried to look at as putting the finishing touches on the summer recruiting period. I wouldn't necessarily say the class because there's still some moving parts, but kind of the finishing touches on that and a time for it's not really a recruiting day. It's a time for them to just come and have fun. We don't really do presentations. It's come and just enjoy yourself. But it's always also been looked at as kind of a springboard into the next recruiting class. You look at each year how many guys that are committed to us in their junior year, they were at Lash Bash the year before, or they were at the Whiteout the year before. There's usually a pretty good correlation between those things. One of the things we've tried to do is keep the numbers down so that everybody can have a great experience. Our numbers are a little bit bigger, so that's probably why you see that. And it's just hard, right? You want small numbers so you can create a great experience, but it's also hard to tell a good player no. Our staff has got a little bit bigger, so I think that will help with that. But it's still going to take some work. And then the next day we're right into camp. So we just got to manage all that the best we possibly can.
James, you mentioned earlier, and when you were talking up there, that you're using the transfer portal when looking at guys from other programs, about guys that you previously recruited. With the NCAA's latest recommendation to possibly take that one-time transfer rule and make it as many times as possible, will that change that approach at all?
No. Well, first of all, that's one of those rules that seems dramatic. That's the current rule right now. It's really not described that way or the way it's communicated. They call it the one-time transfer. But if you look at the waiver process, it wasn't really playing out that way anyway. So I would say no. For us, the biggest thing is a lot of times with the transfer portal, it happens fast. And for me to bring a young man into my program, I want to feel like we really know what we're signing up for. So when it happens fast, if it can be a kid that we really recruited for a year and a half out of high school and we know the kid and we know the parents and we know the high school coach, it makes you feel much more comfortable saying yes in a short period of time because the questions that need to get answered or the boxes need to get checked, you're already there. Does that make sense? Yeah. And when Chop chose another school, it came down to us and them, and we'd been recruiting for over a year, and we had him in camp, and I know the high school coach, and, you know, I coached with the high school coach. So it just makes you feel more comfortable. And as I think we all know is, right, you got to take on some risk in any industry to take that next step. There's some risk associated, but there's also the aspect where you can reduce risk and reduce mistakes. There's tremendous value in that as well. And the more you know a kid and the more you know the family and the background, the more value. Yeah, we have high expectations for all of our players. Obviously, to your point, the guys that come in highly regarded and well thought of, there's a different feel with those guys. I get it. You get different questions. You know, I also look at Drew's high school career. You know, was a really good high school player, then became a Division I prospect, then went from a Division I prospect to one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and then almost in a throwback recruiting style, turned into the number one quarterback in the country his senior year, which that doesn't really happen as much anymore. So I think him and his family, they really handled the process extremely well. They're also a family and a kid that when he committed to us, he was not that. They gave us their word. He committed and stayed true to it, although his recruiting profile maybe changed a little bit, although we viewed him that way the whole time. And he's done all the right things since he stepped on campus, academically, athletically, socially. He makes some big-time throws. He was able to get a foundation laid in the spring because he graduated early. And now I'll have a better feel in camp, because that's the challenge, right? If you're a freshman, you're trying to compete at the same time you're trying to learn the system, and that's hard. Where these guys that were here in the spring or got here early in the summer and were able to learn it all to allow them to truly compete, he's going to have a chance to do that now. So I'll have a better chance, but there's a lot of things to be excited about Drew. Yeah, I think I kind of already answered that. You know, it just speaks to his character, his family's character, that once they gave us their word, they stayed loyal to that and never really ever wavered. And it's funny, like, as other offers were coming in, they'd call us all the time. Hey, I just want you to know this offer came, and this coach tried to talk to us, and they handled it phenomenal. But I also say, let's be honest, that commitment and that loyalty is a two-way street. We see some institutions that drop guys right before signing day because they find someone they think is better, but then they get upset when a player does it to them. And to me, that's something that recruits and high school coaches and parents should look at, because they all say, well, that's not going to happen to my son, not my baby. Well, you should look at that, because I do think if you're asking for loyalty to you or commitment to you, then it should be reciprocated. I think it will get harder. I think it has to a degree. I will also say, for me, this is not a job that's very personal to me, just because that's kind of how I'm wired, but also being from the state of Pennsylvania, it's a little bit different for me. But it's because of our approach. I think some of these schools, you talk to the kids, you talk to the parents, they were pressured into, if you don't commit to us, we're taking this other guy, or whatever it may be, whatever their approach is. And for me, it's the opposite. Kids try to commit, I try to talk them out of it. I'd rather you not commit than commit and change your mind down the road. What if school X offers you, and they haven't offered you right now? Is that going to change your mind? No. What if the Philadelphia Eagles decide to draft you right out of high school? Like literally, I try to talk them out of it, because I do think there's still value in your word, in your reputation, and what the word commitment means. But again, that's got to be a two-way street. So for me, it bothers me, because literally we try to talk them out of it and make sure that the kid, the parents, the high school coach, anybody else involved in the process is comfortable and understands what it means. And once you're there, then wonderful. Let's get up and hug and let's celebrate and let's embrace it. But then, like, the process is over for you, just like it's over for us. So for me, that's what bothers me, is how thorough we are about that. Because to me, if you pressure a kid in a family before they maybe are ready and then they change their mind, well, you created that to a degree.
What do you think is the ideal playoff size at this point, given the expansion that's happened? Probably, do you have a number in mind?
I think the best size or number is the same thing that everybody's going to say. What's in Penn State's best interest? I'm kidding. I'm not, but I am. And I think, like, I'm on the AFCA board, and what you try to do, at least what I try to do, is when we're making decisions for college football, that you take your Penn State hat off to a degree, and you take your Big Ten hat off, and you say, what's in college football's best interest? What is the student athlete's best interest? And if you're not willing to do that, then you shouldn't be in a position to vote or voice. I've sat in the AFCA board meetings, and there was a coach that at school X the year before, and he's pounding the table for this rule, and the next year he's at school Y and he's got a very different opinion. Why? Because his opinion has changed? No, because of how it's going to impact that school compared to that school. And that's not how you should be voting, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, that number, we have to be strategic, and it has to take all of the important criteria into consideration. The academic calendar has to be considered. The length of the schedule. Like, we keep adding games. Are we willing to take a game out of the regular season? Like, all these things have to be factored in and considered. One of the things that's most important to me is if you're in one of the major conferences, you should have an automatic bid. Now, am I probably more aware of that than most? Yes. Why? Because we were the Big Ten championship and didn't get in. We won the Big Ten championship and didn't get into the playoffs. That guy's team did, because I see his bag. You know, and I say that as the Penn State, but any school in the Big Ten that would win the Big Ten championship and didn't get in, they'd have a problem with it. And I think everybody would agree with that. That's fair. So I do think that's something that's important. I do think there's an aspect of, we're in Indiana. Everybody loved the movie Hoosiers. Why? And I'm not talking about University of Indiana. I'm talking about that story of this small school. I think, if I remember correctly, the way the state was set up, it was one state champion, not all these divisions. So this Cinderella story happened. Well, I think there should be a model that allows that to happen in college football. Do I think it's maybe a little less likely in football than other sports? Probably. But you see it in basketball and other sports. So it also allows those schools to have hope, and hope is a powerful thing. And I think is in the best interest of college football. Just like years ago when the Big Ten decided to not play 1AA or FCS schools. That was not in the best interest of college football. A lot of those schools were dependent on that game for their season, for their budget, and all those types of things. Another thing we did from an economics perspective doesn't make any sense. Our guarantee games skyrocketed, went up. Why? Because we had less of a pool to choose from. You know, so for me, I try to look at all these things, and I hope the people that are making the decisions do as well, because what I hate is when we say, oh, well, we made this decision, there was unforeseen consequences. It's like NIL. Oh, well, we didn't know it was going to impact recruiting. Come on. Everybody that really lives and studies college football knew that it was going to have a recruiting component. So I don't want to hear the unforeseen consequences. Think it all out. Talk to the best minds in college football. Factor in all the other things that need to be factored in as well. Go from there. I need to shut up because I see them hanging around. Appreciate you guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.